somebody who loves and adores the original Crow with Brandon Lee, I was very curious about this remake, for lack of a better term. Especially when critics were coming out and saying this movie is probably one of the worst films this year, maybe even worse than Borderlands. But I have a hot take. After seeing this movie, I actually don't think this is the worst film in the year or the worst film of all time. As a matter of fact, I actually enjoyed some parts of this film. But The Crow is still a disappointment. So now let's get into why that is.
You have no idea what hell awaits you. No, I do.
How many people have you loved?
I'll never be alone.
The Crow. Soulmates Eric and Shelley are brutally murdered when the demons of her dark past catch up with them. Given the chance to save his true love by sacrificing himself, Eric sets out to seek merciless revenge on their killers and traversing the worlds of the living and the dead to put the wrong things right. Probably the most apparent reason why I probably didn't like this movie, or at least compared to the original one, is because of its lack of style and heart. The first original Crow with Brandon Lee had a very cool gothic aesthetic, that felt spooky, but also had a sense of like moral and social decay that really complements the story and the characters. And on top of that, you have Brandon Lee, who has a crazy performance in the movie, who, really plays like an insane person who really has just come back from the dead, just waiting to get revenge. It's so satisfying. I think because of that, Brandon Lee as a Crow is probably one of the most unique anti-heroes in film history. Fast forward to today, with the modern Crow, it just feels very dull and lifeless. It feels like an early 2000s action film, if I'm being charitable, which is to say that it totally lacks any of the style and uniqueness of the original film in order to be more realistic. But the film doesn't even try to be gritty when being realistic. So as a result, the film doesn't even feel realistic. It just feels dull and plain. And that doesn't just go for like the art direction of the film, that also goes for like the action and the characters and the performances. On top of that, this film I think has some deep editing issues, especially in the first half. I don't think there was any rhyme or reason to how sequences were stitched together in this film. Tons of shots and quick scenes that felt like they're just randomly placed there that made no narrative sense, and you could have taken these shots out or scenes out in the film, wouldn't change at all. And on top of that, this film was like, some weird temporal issues where, as you're watching the film, and I don't think I'm the only one, who feels like, during the beginning of this film, it seems like it takes place over the course of like maybe weeks or months, but in reality, I think the film was trying to say this takes place over like 3 days or something. But the bigger problem I had than that was actually the script of the film for a couple of reasons. Firstly, when it comes to the story, I really was not invested in this love relationship between Eric and Shelley compared to the original one. What's funny about the original one is that you don't really go too deep into Eric and Shelley's backstory. Most of the film takes place after their murder and after Eric has come back from the dead. You only see some quick flashbacks. But despite that, because of like those little flashbacks and the performances of the characters and just how the script plays out, you do get a deep sense of how Eric and Shelley deeply loved each other. And you feel Eric's pain when he's living with this hole in his heart, and you feel his satisfaction when he gets his wife's killers. Whereas in the remake of The Crow, you're spending a lot of time with Eric and Shelley before the real meat of the story happens, but you don't get that same investment in them. They're not really as likable, or it doesn't come off as them being in love with each other. If anything, it just comes off as them being like horny young people who just know each other for a few days and like they're promising to spend the rest of their lives with each other. Whereas in the original Crow, they already were spending the rest of their lives with each other. And that's kind of what makes it more tragic. And in this film, it doesn't really feel as sad when they both die. Another thing I didn't really like about the story was that this film, I think, introduced too many elements to the plot. Much of these things I think were like just like unnecessary lore and world building that just complicated certain things. And then there were other plot elements in the film that I think were conceptually interesting, especially with the antagonist, right? Making the antagonist a little bit more supernatural. But the film doesn't really play with these things or expand on these certain elements, so they just feel random as a result. In between those elements and the unnecessary elements I was talking about, the plot just feels very contrived, convoluted and confusing at times. Whereas the original Crow, the story is pretty simple. The concept is simple, right? You die, a crow takes your soul, some souls can't rest, and those souls that can't rest, they come back to finish the job or finish the situation, whatever situation they're in, and then they can finally rest in peace. And in Eric's case, it's to kill his wife's killers. However, I did like certain elements of the film. Firstly, I thought the film had really good cinematography throughout, some definitely nice standout still shots, especially with the use of like blocking and colors. Yes, the art direction is still not really good, but I think whoever was a DP did a really good job at making the most out of the plain art direction that he was given. But what I really liked about this film was that the last 20 minutes of this movie or so, that's where The Crow, I felt, really came alive. It ceases to be dull. The action becomes very gory and horror-like. Bill Skarsgård really channels Brandon Lee in his performance in the last 20 minutes. The mise-en-scène also becomes a lot more gothic and spooky, with even like the last set piece taking place where it feels like a very spooky mansion. And all those elements, for me, it felt like this is how a modern Crow should be if you're gonna make Crow in the modern day. So while I was watching this segment, I really was enjoying myself. I really wanted to like this film as a result and just go against the grain. But this film is still riddled with too many issues where I can't give this movie a passing grade. Yes, I do like the finale a lot. I think the cinematography is really strong. But as a whole package, this film is lacking, and that's putting it charitably. So as a result, I want to give The Crow 2.5 stars out of 5. If you just want a easy to digest action film, I don't think it's a bad watch. But if you want something a little more than that, or especially if you're a fan of the original Crow, this film is definitely disappointing for sure.
You have no idea what hell awaits you. No, I do.
How many people have you loved?
I'll never be alone.
Thanks for watching, guys. Let me know if you plan on watching The Crow this weekend. Have you seen the original one? And I'm curious if you guys liked it. I really like it. I've not read the comics. Hit the like button, hit subscribe. I'll see you next time.